that we are studying at all is the first thing to claim. Why are we here? We're here to study together. What does that mean? And I'd like to propose that what it means is a perceptual shift. If we have not engineered collectively a perceptual shift, then we're just socializing together. The difference between this being social and instructive is that perceptual shift. Now, I say this, and I've got a very good example with me. Some people change their mind during the course of a group. And they say one thing at the beginning, and they say, oh, no, actually, I think there's something different at the end now. I had that happen in one of my group. Everyone in the group, there's about 20 people in this group, they laughed at this individual because he clearly was stating exactly the opposite of what he said 10 minutes ago, you know, 15. I said, no, applause to that man. He's done exactly what we came for. He's changed his mind. If we don't do that, we're wasting everything, time, money, everything. Change your mind about something. Now, that could be trivial if you want it to be trivial, or it can be life-changing if you want it to be life-changing. Do you have a preference? Personally, I don't, not for myself, but I do for you. If you want this to be profound, a life-changing event, this course marks the watershed difference between before James and after James. If that's what you want, then behave accordingly. I'll notice, I'll pick up on it. If you want this to be fun, yeah, be lighthearted, you know. If you want it to be a serious step towards mastery, then we're on the same wavelength. That's what I want to try to deliver, if that's what you want. So I'm serious. I'm a serious guy. I was born serious. I got more and more serious as I got older, and I'm really old now, so I'm very serious now. Saturn's my ruling planet. I got Saturn trine the moon. I like Saturn. We're studying Saturn first in this course. You get the idea? Saturn. Saturn is what we're studying today. And I've done it in this order in order that we contextualize ourselves first, and we move towards individuation as the weeks progress, as we come closer and closer and closer and closer to studying the moon in a group of strangers. You know, oh, really? I was in a group once, and this guy asked me, could you just talk about the moon in Scorpio a bit, James? I said, yes, I could. If you want me to expose your innermost emotional secrets to the group, yeah, sure, yeah. No, thank you very much. So for us to feel comfortable with each other enough to deliver meaningful commentary about the most intimate aspects of our psychology, that requires a certain gentleness of being, a certain attitude of what is called in Sufism, which is my background, adab. Now, you don't have to learn that name, but it's called adab, and it means sacred respect, although can't really translate it into English because mantric languages like Arabic have got a more profound sense of meaning within their words. So adab is that we treat each other, treat the teachings, and treat ourselves with a degree of respect which represents our sacredness, our sense of spirituality and sacredness, and the best we can be. It's like putting on your Sunday best. So I want us all to be really, really exceptionally courteous to each other. Now, this will require a certain amount of retraining, and I have already said to other groups that I've done that the content of what we're doing today, astrology, is secondary. The primary thing we're doing today is to train ourselves in listening skills. Now, you think how radical a statement that is to a group of people who came to study astrology. And I say, no, 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 I'm not going to teach you astrology. Well, I will, secondarily, but primarily, I'm going to teach you listening skills. That sounds controversial until you actually understand that why you study astrology is to develop this quality of being able to pick up information from people that they're delivering all of the time, non-verbally, listening on that non-verbal level. If you can do that, you don't need to know much about astrology at all. Books will give you the rest. If you haven't learned how to listen, don't practice astrology, because when you're talking to a client, you're not talking to a piece of paper with symbols on it, you're talking to a person who's invested in this pattern of behavior, and they mind if you've got an opinion different from theirs. So listening is important here. In essence, then, our purpose here is a perceptual shift. Now, Sabian symbols are very helpful in this regard in a way that is incomparable to most things in astrology, insofar as the symbols are ambiguous. They're meant to be ambiguous. They're meant to be obscure, I would suggest. And the two gentlemen who's worked in great detail on this, they tried to explain the meanings of the symbols. And of course, we will try and do that with our left brain, the analytical side. But the woman who delivered these symbols, first of all, the first person to give voice to the name of the symbol was Elsie Wheeler. Elsie Wheeler was an arthritic medium. She was highly psychic, living in California, and the symbols came through her. The Sabian symbols came through her. 100 years ago, Mark Edmund Jones took her to a certain park in San Diego, Bilbao Park, and he got her to come up with 360 images in the course of one day. And he just held up a card and he said, what's this? And she just gave him an image. Held up another, she gave him an image. Held up another, and she gave him an image. Each of those cards was marked with a zodiac, a Sabian degree, like Aries 5, Taurus 17, and so on. And they were shuffled every time. It was a blind test, in other words. So that's what we're studying. And if you look at the placement in like Aries 1, a woman arising out of the sea, can you imagine how could you be more appropriate in discussing the creation myth than that? It's just perfectly placed. That was a coincidence, if you like that word. Look at those moon positions in Pisces, 3 in a row, just approaching the end. That was a coincidence. And all of the other things in the Sabian list are fascinating. It's not a coincidence at all. There's some profound synchronicity going on here. However, for us to access it, and I'm getting to the point here, it isn't enough to think it through logically, nor is it enough just to trust your intuition. What we have to do is both of those things. Now, I'm going to say that again, because if we do not learn how to do that during this 7-week period, kind of missing the point a bit. We're going to try and awaken the right brain and the left brain simultaneously. And to do that, they will both have to communicate with each other, the left and the right brain, the analytical, the intuitive. They're going to talk to each other. What happens when those two talk to each other? Something is stimulated here, which I would know as the third eye. So we are doing work to stimulate and open up this aspect of perception, which is one step beyond intuition. There's something about third eye consciousness, which is very definitely intuitive, but at the same time as getting it immediately intuitively, you can very quickly kind of go through the kind of analytical process to check out that it makes sense. Now, the vast majority of people that I know who are studying New Age mysteries don't really check it out on the level of logic and making sense and discipline the way I would like them to, bearing in mind that my training is in accountancy. So it is either right or wrong in accountancy, and you have to be very, very logical before you make that call. And I would make that call with Sabian symbols in this way. I don't know what they mean. However, I do know what they don't mean. That's the starting point. That doesn't make any sense means that it doesn't mean that. So if you believe that an interpretation of the Sabian symbol is what you want to give it, it has to make some sense. So the rational aspect is a requirement. However, if you stop there, you're really missing the deeper point. And that is that you've internalized it to the level where you can jump to a conclusion that's not written, it's not given, and it differs from what other people say. So here we have an example of where many of us can get a good interpretation of the Sabian symbol and all disagree with one another. And one of us can have an interpretation of that Sabian symbol, and I'm going to say, nope, that's wrong. No, it's not subject to subjective analysis. In this particular point, that's wrong. Now, that's quite controversial because in the New Age, everybody's allowed to think whatever nonsense they want without being criticized. Well, I exclude myself from that. If that's what it takes to be a part of that group, don't want to be part of it. There are some things which are just wrong, and confusion about that is a major problem in spiritual development. Socrates, possibly the best example of wisdom we know in our culture, made such an error of logic. Interestingly. Now, when we get to this point of understanding that rationality and the non-rational are both at play here, and necessarily we come to the understanding that it's subject to our own interpretation. This is subjective. And that gives us a choice of interpretation. Now, are we often taught how much freedom of choice we have in astrology? Or are we more often taught that's what that means? My experience of astrology in the early days was that I was being told by various people, that's what that means. I don't like that. I don't think it's true either. I think astrology gives us a hint, but we've got to crystallize it into what works for us personally. So we're moving into this level of a choice of interpretation. Now, if you see a glass of water half full, there are all sorts of approaches to that, but I've only got one right answer. Whatever works for you in an optimistic sense is the right approach to an ambiguous situation. In other words, one perceives an ambiguous situation as an opportunity to affirm and express faith. And that faith is, this is all going to be all right, basically. That's what I think faith is. Everything's going to be fine. It's going to work out. The future is better than the past. That's what I believe faith is. In other words, it's not different from confidence or optimism. It's not necessary to have faith in something or someone, except for that something being, it'll be all right in the end, So what we're doing now is moving to contextualize certain energies within us. That's the purpose of Saturn. So I'm starting now to study Saturn in particular, and I'm saying that Saturn's major task is to deal with the relationship of the individual with the collective. we cannot create an image of self without knowing what non-self means. It's irrelevant. You can't answer the question. So the polar opposite of anything is what gives definition to that thing. So Saturn is that principle. If we want to know who we are, we've got to know who we're not and how to fit into that. Well, who we're not is the collective. So our relationship with the collective is the essence of Saturn. In other words, the community is helping us to create awareness of the self, the individual self. And the reality that we believe that we live in is communally created. Reality itself is not the same for any two people, but our version of shared reality is, to call it a consensus wouldn't be quite right. On many of the topics, there is consensus. Like, I would think most people here believe that the sun's going to come up tomorrow morning. So we can probably claim consensus for some basic realities. But otherwise, it's sort of certain aspects of our community believe one thing and certain aspects are believed differently. So some of us believe that the earth is a sphere, and others are in the flat earth society. And, we don't talk to each other very much, those two groups of people. But the society that you actually relate to is your own choice of society. And so you've chosen your relationship with society partly by choosing the society you're relating to. So some people go to church every Sunday. Some people go to the pub. Some people go to play football. And that becomes the community that they relate to. And that becomes the source of their Saturn interactions. And that's what we're going to study today individually and collectively in the breakout rooms. We're going to see what we have done to select the community that we're relating to and how that relates to our Saturn. So what community we've chosen and how we relate to it in great detail, actually, is our Saturn energy. Now, of course, the creating of a community depends upon everyone in the community being subject to rules or laws, if you prefer. One of which is denial of desire. If I want to do something and you don't want me to, collectively, I'm really not allowed to do it. Now, if I try to do it, there will be a response to stop me doing it. Now, you can see that response as punishment, kickback, repression, karma, or you can see it as feedback, teaching. Your choice is in that moment. If somebody's actually giving you feedback in the form of a telling off or a forbidding, then the typical response emotionally within us is not delight and joy and compassion. It's being pissed off, isn't it? We don't like being told you're not allowed to do that. Despite the fact that the person that we love more than anyone else in the world was the person that sort of set us up for that energy. We don't get much energy of Saturn type from anyone else comparable to what we got from mom. Mother is teaching us how to socialize, isn't she? No, you can't shit there. That's not what society wants us to do. No, you have to go to bed at this time. Mum's telling us all of the time, what we may do and what we may not do. Interestingly, that's a generalization, but it's worth speculating on. If you want to genderize Saturn, it's probable that you got most of your Saturn from mum. Not for sure. Now, what happens when we desire something and it's refused to us? Oh, I want to do this. You can't. There's that flinch. There's that rigidity happening, isn't there? When you want something, like you watch a child and they just want something and then they're told no. there's that flinch into rigidity, isn't there? Yeah. That's what we do when we come up against authority. We flinch into rigidity, typically. That's what we do in response to authority until such time as we have learned how to practice Saturn energy differently. So that flinch of rigidity that can and does transmute into sclerosis of the physical body. Saturn is to do with aging, isn't it? And getting slow and stiff and so on. So all of that stiffness of the physical body is nothing more than an embodiment of the stiffness of the mental body and the emotional body. That's all that's happening. You get a newborn baby and they're all kind of fluid. You can bend them around and everything, but they're not limited in their sense of reality. It's just like, wow, what's going on here? And they got no, but you try and do that with an old man who knows how things should be done. That's what works and nothing else does. Really rigid, mental and physical rigidity. So that's also Saturn. The idea of settling for less. This is an important one. I want that. It's denied me. All right, I'll settle for less. Now, this is very delicate. On the one hand, I am willing to participate in this community and do my bit and be of service to the community. Fine. I want to do this, but the community doesn't want me to. Fine, I accept that. That's a responsibility. On the one hand, that's good to settle for less. It's tuning into your community. But have you noticed how people take settling for less as a way of life? And they settle for less and less and less and less and less. As the aging process takes hold of them and they sclerose into this rigidity of being. So settling for less is both to the credit and to the debit of Saturn. It's just like the two aspects of Saturn. But I would say that there is a charisma associated with Saturn, actually. It's not all serious. It's not all settling for less. There's some charisma to it. Anybody give me a word for the charisma of Saturn arbitrarily? I'll be very impressed if you get this right. Brownie points if somebody gets this right. Gravitas. If you actually find somebody who really gets gravitas, who embodies gravitas, you stand up when they walk into the room. You can't stop yourself. They walk into the room and you're up. There's something amazing about that magnetism of gravitas. And gravitas is just like, I know what's wanted here. I've practiced this all of my life. I know what to do. I'm right. This is what's acceptable in this society. And I know how to do that so well that they've made me the boss, typically. And if you're the boss of bosses, you get to be queen. I mean, the purpose of our queen, God bless her, because she's just died, is not to make any mistakes for 70 years. That was her purpose in life. She didn't do anything. She just didn't do anything wrong. That was her purpose, actually very valid purpose, despite my cynicism. So that's what Saturn is. The ultimate figure of Saturn is the Queen in England, or the King now, because they represent the highest form of doing the right thing properly. This is how it's done, and you lesser beings haven't quite learned it yet. That's an aspect of Saturn too.